Hi there, it's me, Mikael Jorgensen. I'm here with my friends from Guitarcenter, and we're talking about synth bass sounds using the Moog Subsquent 37, the Moog Messenger, and the Moog Grandmother, and talking about ideas and approaches that you can use to make your own synth bass sounds. My father was a recording engineer in New York City, and between the studios in New York City and where we lived in New Jersey, there was a synthesizer repair place. And every once in a while, he would, on his way home, pick up a piece of gear that had been fixed, bring it home, and it would stay in our house overnight, and then he'd bring it back into the studios the next day. And so for one glorious night in the late 70s, I had a Minimoog D, and my dad put earphones on me and then showed me the knobs to change and manipulate as I was playing sounds. And I was like, okay, how can I do this for the rest of my life? That was the first time that I had used a Moog synthesizer. Every time they come out with a new model, it always sounds great. And I'm happy to demonstrate some of these for you today. I don't know the intricacies and the nuances of the circuit designs of Moog synthesizers necessarily, but I do know my experience of playing them for many years. And what I find inspiring is the richness of these pure sounds. With synthesizers, they're based on oscillators. When there's like complicated math and engineering involved to get the oscillator to play a pitch at a certain note. But there's also this sort of poetic layer on top of all of that where how the sound is generated, the sort of particular nuances of the shape of the waveform and how that affects the sound are all very heavily considered elements of a Moog synthesizer. Maybe I don't think about all that stuff, but I feel all that stuff. They're imperfect in this very sort of small, marginal kind of way. It's the edge of those sounds that are delightfully inconsistent and consistently inconsistent in a way that's pleasing. You have this system that responds to the moment of inspiration. You're like, oh, I have this idea. I want to play something. With analog synthesizers and the Moog synthesizers, there is, within perhaps, I say, a given set of aesthetic parameters, there's a lot of variation. There are so many different flavors of sound that you can use to put a bass sound into a track or have it start a track. And one of the things that I was thinking about starting this process of exploring these different instruments is the idea that it may be useful to consider how much personality your synth bass sound would have versus a sound that maybe is less thirsty for attention and more supporting the harmonic structure of whatever song or piece of music that you're working on. And through this exploration of these three instruments, we'll go through some of those. So these are the Sub 37, the Messenger, and the Grandmother synthesizer. And they're all shining a light on this sort of central idea of using electronics to make sounds. They all have 2 oscillators each. The Sub 37 and the Messenger have an additional sub oscillator that you can add even more depth and bass to your sub sound. The Sub 37 has a sequencer and an arpeggiator built in and an incredible array of controls. And once you learn it and once you understand how each parameter and how each knob and how each button affects the sound, it becomes really fast to change and modify the sound. The Messenger is a smaller, more sort of portable version of this. You have fewer easily accessible, tweakable parameters. However, they have sort of distilled some of the best ones to be accessible very easily. There's a sequencer built in again, and then an arpeggiator. The grandmother has 2 oscillators, but unlike the Sub 37 and the Messenger, the grandmother has patch points, so you can route your signal and your control voltages to modify and manipulate your sounds in ways that you can't do on these two. So 3 different ways of getting some bass sounds. So now we're going to start working with the Sub 37. And the Sub 37 is 2 oscillators, 2 envelope filters, a low-pass filter, a couple of LFOs, a sequencer, and arpeggiator built all in one. And it just sounds great. When I start with an idea, I will take all of the bells and whistles off and just start with 1 oscillator and then sort of scan through the waveforms to find a sound that I think is going to satisfy the song or the recording that I'm working with. So we're going to start with a very basic waveform, 1 oscillator, everything else sort of disabled, muted, off, just to get an idea of the sound of the oscillator on its own. We'll go to oscillator 1 on the 8-foot octave. I'll turn the filter, open it all the way up so that we hear the entire sound. That's a triangle wave. And here is the sawtooth. And here's the square. And here's the square with some pulse width modulation. And you can sweep through from this pulse width modulation to the earlier square. And then from the square to the... And then from the sawtooth to the triangle. Now, earlier I was talking about character and personality of your sound, and the more high frequency information there is in a bass sound, that's really where the character and the personality comes from. The bass note, the fundamental, the really low frequency information doesn't really have a lot of personality based on physics and a whole bunch of important things that I don't understand. So let's start off with lowering this 1 octave. So we have our deep triangle wave, not a lot of high frequency information. The filter's not going to affect that in a way that's extremely discernible. So let's add oscillator 2 underneath and an octave higher and a different waveform. This time, here's the sawtooth wave of oscillator 2. And here is oscillator 1. And together, sounds like that. Why don't we add a little resonance? It's basically a filter that allows only low frequency information to come through. And as you turn the knob, more high frequency information is allowed to pop through. So that was a lot of fun for me as a 7-year-old in the basement of my house in New Jersey. Maybe that's a little bit too much vibe and personality. So let's take the resonance down to something like that. And then let's turn the keyboard track, which causes the filter to open up the higher you play on the keyboard. And so So now you probably can hear that the filter at this octave is a little lower. Here it's a little bit higher and you hear more high frequency information. There, that's almost all the way open. And I'm going to take the release down from these so that it cuts off a little closer to the actual release of the key. And I like the movement of the filter. So I think what I would like to do is add some envelope control. So I'm going to turn the envelope amount up that controls the filter. So now I'm going to adjust the envelope generator to change the filter frequency. That sounds pretty good. And at the moment, the filter is set at a 6 dB curve, which is sort of a more gentle curve. And I'm going to change the slope from 6 dB to 12, 18. If you imagine the filter having like an angle on it and the sound is happening here, this gets sharper and sharper, so less high frequency information comes up. So I'm going to add some more resonance. And maybe change the attack so that we're going to fade into this. And so this is a very personality forward bass sound, in my opinion. A synthesizer sound like this, I think it could be useful in a funk band kind of context with guitars and horns maybe. This high frequency information would punch through the mix. You would hear that and also feel the low end part of it. So I think that would probably be a good use of something like this. The Sub 37 as a standalone synthesizer is just really a very versatile and great sounding synthesizer. The filter on it is really what that personality forward component comes from, in addition to the oscillators and the waveforms that you can select. But sometimes you don't need that much personality, and you just need to really kind of be a musical component rather than a musical and sonic component to a piece of music or a band or whatever the context is. And Moog has introduced a new feature in the Moog Messenger. They call it res bass. What it does is it equalizes or evens out the amount of bass information that comes through a sound, regardless of where you are on the filter setting on the synth. When you have a filter activated on a certain sound, the low frequency tends to go away in favor of that high, sharper sound. So as an example, that high frequency information, you can modify that with the filter frequency, but as you change that, the bass component of that sound becomes a little bit quieter relative to that more high frequency information. On the Moog Messenger, the engineers at Moog have fixed this. So here on the Moog Messenger, I have a sawtooth wave going through, just one oscillator going through the filter. And you can hear, it's similar to the sound we had on the Sub 37. But as I turn the filter frequency, the low end goes away, perhaps imperceptibly at first, but when I engage the res bass feature, that bass is full and firm all the way through the top of the filter frequency, which is a big deal when you're making synth bass sounds. So now let's take a little less personality forward bass idea and see what that looks like. So here's oscillator 1 on its own, sawtooth through the filter about halfway down. Now let's bring in oscillator 2. That's an octave above oscillator 1, but let's detune oscillator 2 a little bit so we get a little bit of chorusing and movement in the sound. It's very subtle, but makes a difference, I think. This envelope is just on and off. It's okay. Let's try and make something a little bit more interesting. So let's change the amplifier envelope. So now we have a nice sort of louder attack and it decays fairly quickly. And now I'm going to increase the envelope amount. And that's okay, but I think I want the filter to go down further than where the sustain is currently. So, and maybe that decay should be a little bit longer. It feels a little too short and snappy. Okay, that's good. But now let's bring the cutoff frequency down a little further. And then let's bring back the envelope amount that is applied to the filter. Oh, that's better. I'm going to turn this up just a touch. Maybe this is like a pick on a bass with a sponge or like a rubber part underneath the bridge. So you have a little bit of a... And then let's drop this an octave and see where we are. Let's open up the cutoff, see where that goes. Now, we're currently using the 4-pole low-pass filter. I'm going to change this to the 2-pole, which is going to take that resonance and maybe not make it as sharp and pointy sounding. That sounds pretty good to me. And maybe even in the context of whatever song that you're working on, maybe that's too much and you have to bring it back. The good thing about all this is it's just all seasoned to taste. It's really, really helpful to work on a sound by itself. But if you're in the studio, try and play it or come up with your sequence. And as the track is playing in what you would maybe is your current mix or your current version of the song, change the sound without soloing it, hear it in context, and make your adjustments. That's never going to steer you wrong. Now we're going to move over to the grandmother, and I have a sound here that I've used with Wilco in almost every show. It's another 2 oscillator sound. Here's oscillator 1, and this is the triangle wave, and here's oscillator 2, an octave higher, and slightly out of tune with one another to give it again that little motion in the sound, which sounds nice. The other thing that we're going to add on this particular sound is some glide between the notes, Portamento. So when I play these 2 notes, legatos, hit this one first, and then hit the other one and let go of the other one before, it just goes from one pitch to the next without any transition. But we can change that by adding glide, Portamento, so now it's sort of swiftly transitioning up to the other note and back down. Maybe bring that back just a and this is both of the oscillators together. And the reason that I think this sound works really well in the context of playing on stage with Wilco is that it occupies a very sort of specific part of the frequency spectrum of the whole band. The guitars playing, drums, another synthesizer, and then singing. Everybody kind of operates within general area of that. And for this part of the song, and so there's not a lot of high frequency information like we were exploring with the other synthesizers, because there's guitars, singing, drums, there's all this other high frequency information happening. And it's a bit of a surprise that there's this big, deep synth bass sound coming through the PA. that's not the song, but you know what it is. So for this demonstration, the Sub 37 was our personality forward sound. The Messenger synthesizer was a little bit more of a muted sound that maybe more closely approximates the sound of a bass guitar. With the res bass feature, you have low-end information across all the keys and all of the settings of the filter frequency. And the sound we have made for the grandmother is a little more utilitarian. Perhaps we could call this a blue-collar bass sound. It's not begging to be noticed, but it really is there in a pinch and helps gird the harmonic structure of whatever song that you're using it on. My recommendation for diving into all this, if you've never used an analog synthesizer before, is to sacrifice your social skills and spend a lot of time at home with just one of these for hours, days, weeks, months, whatever time you have. Once you really understand one synthesizer, you can kind of apply that knowledge in a very general way to almost any other synthesizer. The fundamental components are effectively the same. There's a sound source. You can mix those sounds together. You can affect that sound, and then you can perform it in a bunch of different kinds of ways. I chose the sacrificing social skills to learn how to use synthesizers as a child. If you want to learn about any of these Moog synthesizers, you can go to guitarcenter.com or go play one yourself at your local GC.